Mike Rowe,
Guilty.
welcome to Dad Saves America.
This is not a podcast. I hate to break it to you. This is a television show. Do your viewers understand that?
Some do.
Do they?
Uh, I did see one comment one time
Mm-hmm.
that it was a remote interview, and they're like, "I'm not showing up here for some Zoom call." I'm like, "Both sides look good. What are you complaining about?" It's the first time I've seen a production value criticism. And I think maybe I've spoiled the audience with our beautiful lighting. And our...
Well, I don't know if you spoil them or not, but what you've done is you've set a standard, and now if you back up from it, you will be pilloried, right? and if you go beyond it, I don't really know where the extra credit lives. I know with Dirty Jobs early on, one of the first conversations that I had with the network and the production company had to do with this weird idea that we all agreed that we wanted it to be the most authentic show possible. And if you really believe that, then you have to look at all of the trappings of production as both necessary and evil, with great respect to your cameraman and everything else. I mean no disrespect, but
yeah,
if what you want to do is show the viewer the truth of a thing, then you have to be willing to think that production could become the enemy of authenticity. Necessary, and yet, right? Because what is take two but for a performance? So if you're in the reality space and you want to show people a true nonfiction moment, there can be no take two. And that was a really big conversation that changed the direction of that show.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. You have been on the list for this show from its inception. It was like, who do we want to have on this thing if we're going to do this whole podcast deal? It was like, we got to have Mike Rowe. Like Mike Rowe. I mean, want to talk about agency, about what it means to be a man. For me, being a man involves knowing how to use these things for more than this.
Mm-hmm.
I know that that's not fair to everyone, but it's just, I can't help it. My dad raised me doing stuff with my hands.
Yeah.
But let's actually start with the fact that we are now in the second term of our first reality show president. We are in the era of reality show reality. And you are probably one of the healthiest reality from a content perspective.
Oh, thank you.
Personalities, influencers.
Well, I'm trying to make reality healthy again. It's not bad.
Yeah. Make reality healthy. The problem is that's like you need to get like another vowel in there to make it pronounceable. So yeah, like let's talk about that. Let's talk about this strange sort of social media in some ways created this weird bridge between this thing that we called television.
Mm-hmm.
That was only for people like Mike Rowe and actors and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
and then the rest of us. And suddenly everyone can now broadcast themselves. Mm-hmm. We're on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
How has that changed the way you think about like what your role is in society?
Well, dribs and drabs, frog in the boiling water kind of thing. I'm a late adapter. I'm late to every party, really. In fact, you can find footage of me out there telling Jay Leno I'd rather stick hot needles in my eyes than Twitter or book a face or whatever that stuff was. I was very proud of my recalcitrance vis-a-vis social media because I was having a fair amount of success in broadcast and cable. So I kind of looked at that whole end of the pool as the place you go if you can't cut it at the big boy table, right?
Yeah.
If I'm being honest.
Yeah.
But I'm also being very charitable with respect to my own recollections, because the truth is, while I was demeaning all of that, I was up to my neck in something called the mudroom. And the mudroom was a chat room that Discovery built for me in 2003 or 4. And this is really before social exploded. But what it became for me...
This is like MySpace era, 2003 or 4.
Adjacent,
yeah,
for sure. But I was living on the road at the time, filming the first season of Dirty Jobs. And this mudroom place, I would go, like I'd normally check in after crawling through sewers all day into a Motel 6 or a Super 8 or some other pit of despair, with respect.
On the frontage road.
On the frontage road, my God. I lived on frontage roads for 15 years. But I would go into the mudroom and I would start chatting with fans of the show.
Yeah.
And not just chatting, like wrestling with big, interesting questions and really having like a lively, engaged conversation with the viewers. And it was during those conversations that I realized, from a production standpoint, we were getting so many of our ideas from the viewers. So the viewers began to program Dirty Jobs from the mudroom. And that really was right in front of me the whole time, to answer your question. I just didn't assign the proper level of significance to it until later, when I really ate my words and went to Facebook at the time, which was the big gorilla in the room, and started treating that like the mudroom. And then, you get 6, 7, 8 million people there, and all of a sudden, that's a bigger audience than you have with your show. And so now so the tail's wagging the dog. And so how do you think about that audience? How do you talk to them? And things get very intertwined real quick. And for me, I always took that audience. There's no audience I take more seriously than that audience. And I'm very honest with them. If they chose the cover for my book, they program the content. But I'll ask them anything. I wouldn't have a foundation without their support. I hesitate to call them a focus group, because
they're feedback, though. They're real feedback.
They're instant feedback. And individually, they're as tragic and flawed and funny and real as any other individual. But collectively, they're important, and you ignore them at your peril.
Okay, I'll keep this quick. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that you won't miss more Dad Saves America as our videos come out each week. And it also really helps us, because when we reach out to guests, they look at how many subscribers there are to decide if they want to come on and share their ideas. So please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And thanks for watching. Now, back to the show.
One of the things, so I watched your new show, the first episode of which hit YouTube.
Did you cry?
I did cry.
Good.
So I start off. I'm gonna violate the YouTube rules. The unspoken YouTube rules are, if you want to hook the audience, you got to start negative. Like, what's wrong in the society?
Yeah.
How is everything going to hell in a handbasket? How is America on the verge of collapse, or on the verge of being made great again, if not for the enemies? I'm gonna harm the short run for the long run here, because the thing that's so striking about not just People You Should Know, which is the name of the show. So you're on your promotional tour. But its predecessor on Facebook, Returning the Favor.
Yeah.
And what you have done in those two things, and what I understand you're going to be doing with the new show as it rolls out, is what like social psychologists call like ethnography. Like you are actually going out into America, talking to real people, making it not boring. And it's real. These are people who are doing good things for each other in community. It is positive. Lisa and I started watching it, and our first thought was, this is like a TV show. This is kind of weird.
Right.
Why is this so TV-like?
Yeah.
Mike's old school. Yeah. And then about 30 minutes in, we're both like, ooh, like, you nailed it. You got me.
Good. But look, I'm probably way too in my own head about this, but if you want to understand what's going on with People You Should Know, I should just tell you briefly how it happened with Returning the Favor, because this is actually, for anybody who's interested in media, what I'm about to tell you has never happened before in the history of broadcast. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook decided they wanted to launch something called Watch.
Yeah, this was their pivot to video, as they
That's
say.
right. And really, I think they wanted to know what the odds were, and maybe the associated cost with competing with Netflix. So Mark said, I'm going to spend $1 billion to find out, because I got to know. And I don't want to cheap out. So I got $1 billion earmarked to see. And so Jada Pinkett Smith and a couple of athletes, me, we were all approached to kind of whiteboard some ideas that might work on Facebook. And what came back over the net from our side was returning the favor, just a shameless celebration of the neighbors you wish you had. Regular
And that you
people.
probably do have.
You probably do, but you probably don't know because we don't really talk to our neighbors anymore, right? So in the same way that Dirty Jobs was an attempt to elevate the definition of a good job and the nobility of work with humor and all that, this was a rumination on kindness and decency. Not really altruism, but on just why do some people who give a damn do nothing? And why do other people who care deeply do these other things? Like, what is the difference, and who are these people? Anyway, I didn't want to do a feel-good show. I didn't want to do Move That Bus. I can't stand the earnest. Everything I've just told you about production, I believe.
Yeah.
And everything about those feel-good shows is constructed and manipulated, and you can hear them cueing the cellos, and they all try and make you cry. I hate it.
Yeah.
So I said, look, I don't want to do that, but I'll do the making of a feel-good show, right?
Oh, so, okay. This is making sense to me because in both, you're seeing the crew
All of it.
all the time.
Yeah.
And what most people don't realize about like media and entertainment is it is fundamentally a construction job.
That's right.
Like that's how I explain, like, what's it like to make a movie? It's like, well, it's like building a house. It's like the director is something like the architect.
That's
or
right.
even the general contractor kind of hybrid.
Yeah.
You got your carpenters, you got your lighting and electric.
Yeah.
All the below line guys are all Republicans too, by the way. All of them.
Look at you painting with a broad brush.
But I mean,
Probably
I know I'm on these text threads with my DPs and their guys, and it's like, yeah. So that it's not it's not like all showbiz really. It's all like, it is all dirty jobs making movies and TV.
Sure. With one added component. You're lying. You're lying to your audience. If you're in Hollywood and if you're working from a script, you're lying. If you're the old expression with regard to editing, if you're cutting, you're lying. You're showing the viewer a version of what happened on that day. And to be fair, I mean, that it would be chaos in a scripted world if you didn't use production the way it's used, and if you didn't rely on editing the way you rely upon it. You'd just be a hot mess of discombobulated nuts. What happened in reality TV, in my view, is that we started out in a pretty pure way where reality meant reality and where nonfiction meant the absence of fiction. But during the writer's strike, a lot of people started looking for work who didn't have it. And a lot of people in Hollywood brought everything they knew about the pretense of making content into a new vertical that was fundamentally defined by its lack of pretense. And so suddenly reality became fake real, if you will.
Yeah.
And
it became unscripted.
That's right. Which is like,
reality
okay.
was dropped. I mean, you're talking about the exact moment I got out of film school and entered the business, because I was, it was like 2000. It was the fall of '99, and I was going to move to Los Angeles, and I met this grizzled old producer from Jersey. And he's like, "You don't want to go out there. There's no work. The writer's strike."
Listen to me, kid.
Yeah,
Chew you up, spit you out.
It really was. Great guy, Mick Shevchuk, old, like, Ukrainian.
Oh my God.
And so I went to New York.
Sounds like Burgess Meredith.
It was really
Rocky.
something else. And I was working at MTV, and so that was kind of the birthplace of reality with the Real World.
That was right there. And then, of course, Survivor, which was reality competition, which is when you start to see, they're doing an awful lot of cutting in here. I'd put Real World and Cops, like, right, in that same place. And with great modesty, Dirty Jobs, because of something that happened in season 1, which is actually the answer to your question regarding returning the favor and people you should know, and the reason I ultimately was happy to do it. In season 1 of Dirty Jobs, we hit a wall. We were halfway through it, and it was a very difficult show to shoot. It's a very dangerous show to work on.
Yeah.
My crew was assuming extraordinary amounts of risk, and we were in really treacherous environments. And I just found all of that super interesting. But the production company and the network and I'm not blaming anybody, but they're all bringing their experience into this thing, and we're all kind of shooting the show the way other shows have been shot. And I just said, look, guys, there's no way we can sustain this. There's no way. In fact, it's dangerous to try and make a classic TV show this way. We need to stop thinking about camera A and camera B and camera C, right? They're all camera one, or they're all, actually, I said, they should all be behind the scenes cameras. But I know you're not going to do that. So let all these cameras do what they do, but give me an extra one. Let somebody come along and document the making of the show. Just shoot everything wide and never stop rolling. So if my battery craps
Just hosing it down.
That's it. Just always be there. So and I said, look, I promise I won't abuse it, but there are going to be many times over the course of filming where I'm going to want to find the truth cam. That's what I called it. So anytime I could just find the truth cam and tell the viewer, hey, look, this is what's happening right now. A plane flew over. My audio guy's crying about it. We had to pause. I think it's stupid, but this is what they do. Okay, this is what they do.
Breaking the fourth wall. It was the fourth wall break camera.
That's what the network said. But I said, look, I don't think I'm breaking the fourth wall. I think I'm ignoring the fourth wall. There is no wall. It's like the moment in The Matrix. There is no spoon. Right now, I'm probably putting way too much thought into it. But when I look back, when all that got cleared, and when we started to take that footage and sprinkle it through the finished version,
brought to life,
like salt, it brought it to life. It also let the viewer feel like they were there with us along for the ride. And that's why the mudroom became a very intimate place. They really felt like they were with us. It also made many celebs out of the crew. People developed a real appreciation for Doug Glover and Troy Paff, who had these 40-pound cameras on their shoulders in a sewer. They got to, like, at any time I could crawl over and ask them about their day. And that's all getting captured. And we cut that into the show. Nobody had done that before. So, and finally, the thing that camera did for me was people began to trust me. Because why would a guy covered with other people's crap literally lie to them? Like, I'm showing you how it's made. I'm making it in front of you. We're building an airplane in the air. You know, it was and so all of that was happening anyway. But the fact that we were able to show you the truth of it kept the show on the air for 22 years. And so when this feel-good show landed in my lap with Facebook, and I knew I didn't want to do it. But then I said, well,
but $1 billion.
But $1 billion. No, I said, look, if we can do it this way, right? So I had to say, look, Facebook can be Facebook. Hudson, the production company, can be Hudson. But I need a camera following me. And when we cut this thing together, I want the viewer to see how ridiculous, futile, Sisyphean, and occasionally quixotic this whole process is.
Yeah.
And I want them to see when we get it right and when we get it wrong, and the fun of trying to put this thing together. And it was met with the same resistance it's always met with. And this is not a criticism, but before we started rolling, so my phone and my glasses are down there. They were on the table, and a lovely guy came in and said, here, let me get this out of the shot.
We're a little old school. We got a little bit of an old school deal going.
It's not old school. It's just everybody has a job to do, and everybody wants to be great at it. And I love that. That's a really important part of anything working right, until you venture into a new space. And that new space, for one brief and shining moment, lived up to its name. And that name was reality. And I felt very righteous I'm like, if we're going to do reality TV, we're going to do it warts and all. And thankfully, the stars aligned, and we were able to do that with Dirty Jobs. And I was able to take that little component, the making of a thing, and for what it's worth, whether I'm making a commercial or a video for my foundation or a show for YouTube or Facebook or whoever, that component's always there.
One of the things that is striking to me about the show, but also about, I think even like broadly reality, especially like HGTV, like the home shows, like
Yeah.
Chip and Joanna Gaines up in Waco.
Yep.
Is it's this sort of, it's like a place where like normal America comes to life in heroic stories. You know, I was at Spike TV. As I was leaving, we had a show called Bar Rescue.
Sure.
I mean, this is like a business show. It's like, oh,
were you at Spike when I was doing Ultimate Fighter?
it was me and Terry Minogue were the two creative directors. Terry had UFC, and I kind of had like a bunch of the other stuff because UFC was the hit and a monster.
Yeah.
And then like, you know, so 1,000 Ways to Die was one of the shows I was in charge of promoting.
Was that Tom Beers?
It was Tom Beers.
Sure.
Yeah, and it was often very upsetting.
Well, you know, with so many ways to perish.
Yeah, it's like,
really...
okay, we're going to cut this promo for somebody being electrocuted because they piss on an electric fence. And we can't give the whole thing away. It was macabre.
Coming up, his chute doesn't open.
Yeah.
And it doesn't end well.
I mean, you know, we're here in Texas, and as an East Coast guy, I was always annoyed that at the end, you know, next Thursday night at 9, 8 Central. It's like, can we drop the 8 Central? Who's in Central? Who's in Central? And now I'm in Central. But in a way, Central is what so much of these shows are. You know, we talk about like flyover country. It's most of America.
Oh, yeah.
Most of America living lives of quiet dignity. And you point those cameras at it. And it also works because so much of our media is fundamentally negative. And we live in this moment now where to kind of like call back to this question of how do you optimize for engagement?
Right? Oh, God. I literally just, I don't know if you heard that, but my sphincter just slammed shut. Like optimizing for engagement.
It's
I just can't.
awful. It's fucking awful. But it is just like human nature turbocharged. And yet there you are telling positive stories about people in America who are living lives of quiet dignity.
Yeah.
And I guess this is like the big, like to jump into the deeper end of the conversation. I think a lot of people, and I think the vote for Donald Trump represents this in a certain sense, but they're across the spectrum. You know, Gen Z men in particular feel this way. But a lot of the country feels like we're sort of screwed. That there's like we're like it's like the middle class has gone. We don't make anything in America anymore.
Feels like that, yeah.
Our industrial base has been hollowed out, and I'm not saying these things to mock these positions. But you've done a thing I would love to do, which is you've actually traveled this country and talked to a lot of people, thousands of people in these jobs. How do you see where we are in America today being a documentarian of like American life in a very real sense?
Chuck Todd asked me that question in 2016 on Meet the Press.
You put me in bad company.
I'm
sorry.
You
okay.
know what
Keep going. No, it's fine. It's fine.
Parallel careers.
No,
I had written.
I don't know Chuck Todd. Maybe he's a nice guy.
I mean, he was very nice to me. But a couple weeks before the election, I can't say I called it, but I wrote something publicly that said, I don't take it from me, but based on everything I've heard, Trump's going to win. This is in 2016.
Yeah.
And so Chuck and the Meet the Press gang were terribly interested to know why I thought that. And, you know, I took my little victory lap and I went out and I told them what I'll tell you now, which is I've been through Dubuque, Des Moines, Davenport, Marshalltown, Mason City, Keokuk, Ames, Clear Lake, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, you know, and every state, half a dozen times. And I just didn't feel that the other candidate had any enthusiasm behind them. And I knew that this guy had broken a lot of eggs and was seen as a joke by many. But the people who did support him did so with great enthusiasm. So that's all it was for me. I say, I don't see any enthusiasm over here. I see a lot of enthusiasm over here. And in some cases, the enthusiasm was a result of a lot of pre-existing frustration. But mostly, and this certainly, I was not the first person to say this by any stretch, but he just paid attention in ways. You felt like he was paying attention, and I get it. He's a billionaire. What in the world could he possibly have in common? But I still remember footage of Hillary sitting in some bar in some steel town doing a shot of rye with a bunch of guys after the shift, and I still remember the rye like running down her chin, and I remember just looking at that, going, that moment, that is not an authentic moment.
No, it's the Elizabeth Warren. Let me go get a beer. I do like beer.
Yes.
Beer is delicious.
Something else was happening in the country too at the same time that I found analogous to like what was happening in the politics or the political realm vis-a-vis authenticity was happening in my world too, and in journalism. Right. This was around the same time that Jon Stewart was rated the most trusted source of news.
I know this is where like you're putting these checks in the collapse of civilization side of the ledger, I think.
Well, that is a pessimistic take on it, and you might be right. But at the time, I thought it was more of an indictment of back to the artifice and back to the pretense of making content. If you think about Peter Jennings, or just fill in the blank, any anchor wants more than anything else to be taken what?
Seriously.
That's right. They wish to be believed. They wish to be seen as credible, and therefore they want to be as persuasive as they can possibly be as they look into the camera with all the earnestness they can muster and pretend not to be reading. And of course they're reading. Like so it's like, okay,
the irony of it is you start off like some like local reporter running around during hurricanes, going to bake sales and occasionally covering like a local murder.
Yeah.
And then if you succeed enough, you end up reading a script probably written mostly by someone else.
I just think it comes down to the cognitive dissonance in your own mind when you know that what you want more than anything else is to be believed. And then you look at the list of things you do to render yourself fundamentally suspect / unbelievable. And again, this is not a criticism of anything we're doing here. I know you're old school, but Atlas shrugged, man, and times have changed. And if I'm going to get my news from somebody, I don't care if they're wearing makeup. I don't care if there's flyaways. I don't care if there's a wallet or glasses on the desk. I remember Walter Cronkite taking off his glasses and looking up at the camera and saying the president has been shot. And like in that moment, my God, it was never mind the horror of what was being conveyed. The verisimilitude of the moment was so genuine and so authentic, right? And today, I see so many people sitting in that chair. They're just acting. They're just acting like news people. Why would their voice drop a little bit when the subject matter becomes a bit more serious? Why is everything live, local, late breaking? What's with the graphics? What's with the music?
What's with the sing-songy cadence of speech?
I don't know.
It's amazing that persists, actually.
It truly is.
You watch local news right now. You just
Yep.
turn on the local news, and there is like an almost like mid-Atlantic sing-songiness.
Yep. Yeah.
It's weird. We've
It's
taken
7
it for
a.m.
granted.
and it's right to, it's all, I don't know. I suspect it's a big bowl of warm milk. And, a lot of research has been done, and people like certainty and people like familiarity. And so we give them the things that they claim to like. But then sooner or later, we pay a price for doing that. And we also foster, I think, a certain contempt in the audience because they realize now that somehow or another, on some level, they're being pandered to. And that erodes the thing that's most important, which is trust. And now I'm just talking about journalists, but not really. Actors want to be believed. Spokespeople want to be believed. Podcasters want to be believed. Reality show hosts want to be believed. presidential candidates want to be believed. Chuck Todd wants to be believed. You want to be believed. I want to be. Right? We all want the same basic thing, but we all come at it with varying degrees of differentiation. To your point, I think what happened with Trump then and now was the same thing that made Jon Stewart weirdly credible in that moment in time. He was, I think Time magazine called it fake real. And
kayfabe.
Yeah. John lampooned all the tropes of broadcast journalism. He made fun of the prompter. He made fun of the music. He made fun of the ruffling with the papers and then looking up. Every single thing was revealed to be bullshit. Everything. And what did the audience do in response to that? They believed everything he said. And for me, maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but after crawling through sewers and septic tanks and having toilets blow up in my face and going through every imaginable misadventure in animal husbandry and taking every metaphorical pie in the face that you can on dirty jobs and laughing through it and trusting the truth cam to capture it all, they trusted me. And so, somewhere between Mike Rowe and Donald Trump and Jon Stewart and anybody who was ever lucky enough to Forrest Gump their way into the zeitgeist at a time when things shifted, right? That's what happened, I think. I don't think Trump could have won 4 years earlier because I don't think the world was where it was. And I'll stop the filibuster by saying, to me, every single thing, not everything, most everything comes down in our business to, was that persuasive or not? Yeah, and it's real simple. And so if this new show I'm working on, if it's persuasive and if it feels real, it'll do well. And if it doesn't, it won't. And all I can do is throw the mud and see what sticks and hope for the best.
Do you think the angst is hyped in our society? Do you think that things are as bad as we come to feel when we spend time on screens? Or is the fundamental nature of the American experience? I know every person is going to have their own experience, so there is no aggregate American experience, not really, technically. But as far as...
That's too important to be a parenthetical. What you just said is the point. There is... The devil today is the broad brush with which we paint. You have a big audience, I hope.
We'll try.
But I get real stingy, like with advice, when it comes to college and the things I talk about all of the time around the skilled trades, because I honestly don't know who's listening, and I don't know what they need to hear. I really don't. And so, do we collectively overemphasize the negative? I guess. But I don't know what to do with the truth of that, other than to say that a lot of us don't. We were talking off camera before on the way over here. This guy picked me up at the hotel himself, by the way. But I mean, just so your viewers should know, there's no black car, there's no car service. He just shows up in his SUV. Hey, man. It drives me over here
in my 11-year-old personally modded because if you want to get a V6, you got to buy like an old car.
You better know a guy who knows a guy.
I mean V8, sorry, V6. V8.
Please, yeah. But we should have had GoPros on your dashboard because we talked about this. It's interesting. Like you think you know your audience. I thought I knew the mudroom pretty well, and I did. And then maybe less so with, as the numbers get bigger, it's hard to know. Like, it's hard to know when you're in your bubble or outside your lane. What the hell am I doing on Meet the Press? Honestly, I tell you, what am I doing weighing in on the changing face of the modern day proletariat vis-a-vis the digital divide and Donald Trump's influence on the, modern political. How the hell how did that possibly happen? What could I possibly say?
It's a little faux modesty in this sense. And here's to push back on this. You have actually done a thing that most people don't actually get to do, which is go and spend time with a lot of different people in a lot of different circumstances and jobs and towns. And it isn't, anecdote isn't the same thing as reality. Like it gives you one truth, not the truth or something.
All right.
But like my first feature documentary was called At the Fork, and it was my dirty jobs experience because my wife and I went and toured 26 states over the course of 6 months, exploring the challenges with raising animals for food through the lens of animal welfare, it didn't succeed as well as it could have, I think.
Wait, was this just a trip for fun, or were you trying to make a show?
No, this is a feature documentary. It's on Amazon.
I thought it was just what you did with your wife.
Yeah, no, it was just for fun. It was just for fun. I always wanted to tour the country, and I got to. And we spent time with ranchers and some of the biggest egg producers in the country, and people that work with pigs. And I mean, I'm like watching pigs get their tails clipped, and I'm in there with the like the whole thing. Like I got hogs biting at my boots, and I'm like, are these going to hold up? Because these things are pretty strong. Like, all the stuff.
You did your little dirty jobs thing.
I had my moment of that, but I came out of it understanding something different about the country for me, which I didn't really know as like essentially an East Coast, mostly urban, suburban guy, which is the biggest cultural divide in this country, I think, singularly, is rural versus urban. It was hard not to see that. It was like there's two Americas along a lot of dimensions, but rural versus urban is a pretty big one. It is very, very, you are watching, Charles Murray talked about this in a certain sense with his book Coming Apart, though he was cutting it differently.
Important book.
But that there is a very distinct experience for people who work in ranching, in farming, in oil and gas, in all the stuff that powers the city that the people in the city just think happens when you flip a switch.
For sure.
And it takes fewer people to do those jobs, to deliver that plenty than it used to, which means we live in a society, America used to be something like 40% farming employment not that long ago.
Well, it used to be 90.
Right. There's this term, bullshit jobs. And I was talking to a buddy recently, and he said, we got to realize something. Every job that's not growing food is technically a bullshit job.
Let me tell you how it was explained to me. Early on in Dirty Jobs, I sat down. I was having a beer with a miner, not a young person, a miner, bituminous coal miner,
a Western Pennsylvania miner.
And he said, "Let me tell you something, Mike. There are only two industries in this country. There have only ever been two industries. There's mining and there's agriculture. Everything in this room was either pulled out of the earth and fashioned into something useful or grown from the earth and either eaten or likewise fashioned. Those are the only two industries there are. Everything else is subordinate to them and derivative in some way, right? Every trade job is just one level down from mining, right? And I thought that was really smart, and
it's true, technically.
Well, when you start thinking about work in that sort of hierarchical, primal way, then you can't help but try and look for your place in the hierarchy. And ultimately, if you're honest, I think you can't help but to conclude to some degree that what you wound up with was a bit of a bullshit job, right? If you're not in the mine or growing the food, okay, and that's not an indictment. I don't think it's a bad thing to be self-aware enough to know that part of what you're trying to do to make a living is play the cards you got and function in the system we're in, and so that does, I think, require a certain amount of navel gazing and introspection, but no more than necessary. You certainly don't get any extra credit for thinking too hard and too long about the bullshit meter with regard to work. But you do need to think about it with regard to persuasion. Again, what is persuasive? What's working? And to your point, when you think about the divide, I live in California, and I always laugh when I hear about, well, that's a Northern California thing, and that's a Southern California thing. And so everybody thinks there's a big divide in California somewhere between San Francisco and Los Angeles.
That's the wrong axis.
That's right. The divide in California is north to south. And if you talk to Victor Davis Hanson, I'm sure you crossed paths before. If you haven't, you should have him on. He's the prince of articulating that. And I couldn't agree with you more.
And by that, just to orient, you say the line goes from north to south, which means the divide, you've got the coast.
That's right.
And then you've got the inland.
That's right.
And the inland, and it's politically divides that way too. Like you
So
pop
much.
out, like,
Yeah.
in my more partisan moments, I've thought about, you remember Richard Donner's Superman?
I remember
The original
Donner.
Superman.
Oh, sure.
The original
Yeah, yeah.
Superman with
Chris Reeves.
Chris Reeves.
Amazing documentary, by the way. Really, if you haven't seen the one that's running now.
But Lex Luthor in that movie has a plan. And his plan is to blow up the San Andreas Fault and turn the land to its east into beachfront real estate. So he's buying up the real estate along the San Andreas Fault. And he's going to sink California into the ocean.
Yep.
And there are times where I wonder if maybe he was the good guy in the movie.
This would be one of your more partisan moments. Yeah. Look, I mean, why do you think that movie, which was very much a crapshoot? I mean, a lot of smart people thought that thing was doomed. Doomed. People told Chris, don't do this. For God's sakes, don't do it. Why do you think it worked?
You know, it's funny because I was looking back because I was thinking this movie came out in early 1980s, but it was 79.
Yeah.
So 79 is a kind of breaking point, right? You have stagflation, you have Jimmy Carter, a good person and a bad president. Although he did deregulate trucking and airlines, so I'll give him credit for that. But going on TV talking about malaise and about readjusting our expectations. And so you have a moment. I was born in 77, so I'm a baby at this point.
Good for you.
But it was striking. I thought it was like this movie in some ways it was almost like the herald of the 80s. Like Superman was literally the actual herald of the 80s.
None of that occurred to me in 1979 when I sat in the theater and watched it. But later, I did think about it. You know, if you think about the San Andreas Fault in the culture, the fault between, driven by the malaise that you were talking about. This is pre-Reagan.
Yeah.
We were looking for a Superman. We were looking for somebody who could just dive down into the earth and pull it back together, essentially. And in a lot of ways, again, maybe a stretch, but I think there's a bit of that happening now. I talked to Dan Carlin the other day. He's got a pretty good podcast.
Oh, yeah.
Hardcore history. We were talking about the great man theory, vis-a-vis Trump. Not in the sense that he's great in the literal, but a key man in history.
Yeah, high impact.
Right.
Consequential.
I don't know how you argue with that. I don't know how you can see what's happening right now and make it small. For better or worse, it's not small.
No, it's not.
It's right.
Yeah, for sure.
So, again, I'm being a little grandiose with it, but why in the world would Dirty Jobs work? It was off-brand. They shelved it for a year after the pilot. The network did not want it to be a hit. They did not want their viewers to like the show as much as they did because it conflicted with their sense of who their audience was. This is like, what do you do when you realize your customer no longer wants what you're selling or wants something more than you want them to want it? I think this is the most interesting challenge of our time. And so when that happened at Discovery, it was a real crisis. Like, remember, Jane Goodall, and Jacques Cousteau, and Richard Attenborough, and that was the network of trusted authoritative figures. And along comes a smartass crawling through a sewer making dick jokes, okay? And artificially inseminating cows in prime time, okay? With an artificial vagina, okay? I mean, the things we did, it was so off-brand, but it was also so genuine and rooted in curiosity. And so the way I would tie it all together is to say that what the audience wanted was something that felt like, well, something honest. And what the audience in 1979 wanted from Superman was an example, was a show me some, I don't care if it's fantastical, but show me what it looks like if the world's pulled back together again. And on Dirty Jobs, all I was really trying to do was make good on that guy's observation. I want to elevate mining and agriculture and all of the subordinate jobs that rely upon it and the people who do the work, because I think they're supermen. You know, I think they're doing something that is both essential and unappreciated. And I think the miracle of 1.5% of the country feeding 330 million people 3 times a day. I mean, if you're not properly,
and we're throwing 40% of that in the trash too
every day. If you flick the switch and the lights come on and you don't immediately go, ain't that a kick, man? You flush the toilet and you wave goodbye to the crap and you're not properly gobsmacked by that. Well, you know, that's where I'm afraid we are. And if the country doesn't have an appreciation for these supermen and women who are doing these kinds of jobs, well, then I can draw a pretty straight line to that, to all the trouble in the world, from the skills gap to the cost of college to fill in the blank. So, yeah, people come along, and some of them are often unlikely cast. It could be a figure like Trump. It could be any number. How in the world can more people be getting their news from Jon Stewart in 2017 than any others? How do you explain the success of a show like Dirty Jobs that was fundamentally off-brand, or a movie like Superman that was doomed to fail by every prognosticator? It has to be, in the words of Howard McMillan, events, dear boy. Events.
There's a cycle feeling to some of this. This sense that we're at, the fourth turning or something, there's, these are cycle changers. So optimism, what's the sequence, bad times create good, strong men create good times create weak men create bad times. And it feels like we were right at the crack up stage of the weak men. And we probably still are in a very real sense, but there's we have lived a life of incredible abundance, ahistoric, completely crazy. Everything you just talked about, the things we take for granted in the first world, that still billions of people would just dream to have. They would just dream to have it, to plug in and get power at a price that you can pay with an hour or two of work.
Sure. And sidebar, I refuse to feel guilty for that abundance. I don't. But the corollary is you must be grateful for it.
Well, this is the interesting challenge, and it is that the abundance that we have in the West, in the first world, and this is not a new thing for people to opine about, but it does seem to have given rise to a kind of soft, lazy, type of mentality and a sense of entitlement in all of us. But especially in those who don't touch grass, so to speak, and don't get their fingernails covered in soot. That then you just say, well, of course, these are all rights. These are all human rights, like having health, having wellness, having power, having the things. These are human rights, like that arrive in like a tree of magic, and so you get this thing where 1% is feeding everyone. And so, like we were talking about the hierarchy, like at the base is, essentially the raw materials of life, food, and minerals and materials, wood, steel, coal, copper, and then everything else is a bullshit job on top of that. But then when you have like almost nobody working in that and everyone else living on the benefits of it, this feels like a teeter.
It's getting a little wobbly up there.
And that is one piece of the puzzle of, I think, the instability of our times. It's like, I think you have shined a light on the people at the base of that. You know, the base like this from need, Maslow's hierarchy, but in terms of number, you know, we're all sipping lattes and shit. And then down here is like all the stuff that we need, without which it all goes away like that. You know, I was in New York City during the power outage that hit the whole Northeast. I just talked about this in a video because Spain went through the same thing because they got too many stupid windmills. And like, you see how quickly civilization will collapse if you don't have power. You don't have electricity. Like, it's gone in 4 or 5 days. All the food goes bad. You don't have refrigeration. All the medicine goes bad. All the preemies in incubators are dead. I mean, like, the stuff gets dark, literally and morally dark, really, really fast.
So Maslow, since you evoked his name, I think it was Maslow, talked about there are really only 2 things that push people into movement. And that's the desire to get closer to pleasure, or the desire to get further from pain. And when presented with the 2, one is always superior to the other. And people don't start behaving until there's pain.
Yeah.
And when I say behaving, I don't mean falling in line. I mean reacting.
Yeah.
Right. And
taking notice, changing their behavior.
Right. So how do you inflict a level of pain that can galvanize people? Well, you turn the power off. That's what you do today. There's no faster way to do it. Because, by the way, I mean, the idea of preemies dying in incubators is horrifying. But think about the terror of being offline, of just not being able to get to your phone to check whatever it is you check that would make people absolutely lose their minds.
Well, I've had guests on this show who focus on this with kids, and that a serious problem in our society, and it has been for a while now, is that parents who try to take away phones from kids who have truly gotten addicted to them face real physical violence from their kids. I mean, like being physically threatened with death.
Yeah.
If you take the Black Mirror out of their hand.
Because it's not a phone. It's a surrogate for their identity. It's the means by which they connect. You know, back to Maslow, it's part of that hierarchy, you know, it's a fundamental need to connect. And we're not connecting in ways that I did when I was a boy. It's just a whole new set of rules. So look, smash all of that together. And to go back to your original question, are we accentuating the negative? I still don't know, but we sure as hell better be acknowledging it. You know, how far do you lean into it? It depends. Do you really believe it only gets better if things go splat? If so, why not accentuate the splat? I've heard this argument made regarding tariffs. I've heard this, you know, it's fascinating to me. The whole tariff conversation is...
Yeah, what's your take? What's your take on the trade situation? Do you have a take?
Yeah, sure. Great.
Here's a plank to walk out on,
Where did it
Mike?
end for Mike? Yeah, hey. He said it was a podcast. Turns out it's a TV show, and he mouthed off pretty good. My take is, I don't know of any economists who think it's a good idea, but I know lots of people who aren't economists who believe that from time to time, the economy is not the most important thing to the country. It's always important, and it's rarely out of the top 2. But I think there are times, certainly in history, when you can look back and say, okay, well, that's something we did in spite of the economy, not because of it. I mean, I think every smart economist, if there was such a thing in 1860, was saying that, look, if we abolish slavery, the economy is going to collapse. There's no way we can withstand that kind of gutting of the labor force. It might even lead to a civil war. So, sorry, we can't talk about eliminating slavery. It would be suicidal to the economy. But the country said, well, maybe not. Maybe right now this thing is more important than whatever short-term, mid-term, or even long-term chaos getting rid of slavery will do. Now, I know.
In fairness to the older school economists like David Hume and Adam Smith, they were both abolitionists. So the sort of early what would be called liberal economists.
That's right, but they weren't making an economic argument to get rid of slavery. It was
a moral argument.
They were making a moral argument. So that's
right.
different. So is there something today that would justify, and I'm not sure the administration has made this argument, but when I have a couple of pops and sit down with my buddies, what I typically say is, if we're going to talk about the economic impacts of tariffs, fine. I'll show you the last 3 interviews I've done with CEOs of companies who run organizations that make things in America, because we need to hear from them too. Josh Smith, Montana Knife, Bayard Winthrop, American Giant. These guys are not experiencing any supply chain issues, and I think that it's instructive to hear from them. But if you're not willing to have a conversation outside of the economic impacts of tariffs, then whatever, you're just stuck in that box. But what if our identity as a country, our willingness to make things, our ability to make things, what if our reliance on countries who don't love us needs to be reckoned with, right? I talked to Jan Jekielnik. You know him over at Epoch Times?
I think I've read some of his pieces.
He's it's an amazing story, and it's finally got some traction. But there are a lot of hospitals in China that have been built right next to prisons, and last year, somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 organs have been harvested from political prisoners. People routinely schedule liver transplants and heart transplants. You're not supposed to be able to schedule those things. You go on a list in this country and you wait for some calamity to occur. And so, right, you get in line.
Yeah, there isn't a stock of human organs currently inside of a human, but soon to be not, if necessary.
But there is over there. There is. And the Falun Gong and the political persecution of that particular sect, it's close to 70 million people. It's been going on for 20 years. It makes the Uyghur thing look kind of small. But the point is, if you're going to have a conversation about whether or not it makes sense to be reliant on a country who is running a $9 billion organ harvesting operation, then okay, but it's better to know, right? Like if you're going to argue for the institution of slavery, then you ought to visit a plantation and you ought to see the conditions and you ought to be familiar with the Middle Passage. And if you're gonna eat meat, as I do every day, you should visit a slaughterhouse. You should help in the butchering of a cow. It's better to know, right? And you can fill in that blank. If you believe in capital punishment, I think you should absolutely bear witness to an execution. And if you want to argue for or against, well, if you want to argue for abortion, why not? Why not understand? Why not look at the thing? So look, that's my hot take on it. Our head is in the sand. And it's comfortable down there. We don't have to look at these things all of the time. But it's better to know.
I think that because I spent some time with this issue when it comes to like eating meat, animal products. The thing that is weird about that, and there's never been a vegan society. John Mackey, who's a friend of the show, dear personal friend, co-founder of Whole Foods Market. He is vegan, and he will say there has never been a vegan society. So it's not natural to never eat any animal products. But most people can't tolerate seeing the process. They can't tolerate knowing that the way you get milk, the thing that was so striking to me when we made this film and screened it and stuff, is there's a moment in it where a calf is separated from the mother, the baby calf, and put into a cage that's going to go off to be either veal or hamburger meat. And it has been without fail that every audience, they are struck viscerally by this. And it doesn't occur to them that cows are mammals, and mammals produce milk in the aftermath of pregnancy. They don't produce milk all the time. So if you want to have large-scale milk production, you need to have cows constantly bearing children.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to do something with them.
Technically, calves.
Yeah, small cows. Yes, I guess children can be used in a general
That would be
sense,
something,
right?
That would be something.
Human children.
A
It's like,
human
God.
child out of a cow. Now we've
They're
got
working
a topic.
on that in Silicon Valley, I'm sure. Some kind of nightmarish chimera with a chip in its head. But
But so what? It's uncomfortable. So what? Eat your peas. Look at it. Or don't eat it. Now, I know that sounds a little glib, and I realize it's sensitive, but I took it back to my guy who talked about mining and farming.
yeah,
I spent a lot of time with a lot of farmers, and their biggest frustration, aside from just being generally unappreciated, I think, is the genuine mystery held by most people as to where their food comes from.
it comes from the grocery store.
It comes from the meat tree.
Yeah.
It comes from whatever it is. We just don't know.
It comes from something that produces a wrapped thing.
I did a story of a guy called Earl, the mobile butcher in Western Michigan. This is rough, but I'm just going to tell you because it's better to know. All right. And the fact that I got this on the air is one of a dozen miracles from those days. But I rode with Earl one day because I wanted people to see where their meat came from. And Earl took me to a small, I can't even call it a farm. They had a couple cows, but the family raised the cows for their own meat.
Mm-hmm.
And they had kids, and the kids and the parents, they loved the cow. They get attached to the cow. The cow's there for 2
Did
years.
they name the cows that they would slaughter? Because that's usually the no-no.
This is another story.
But
It has to do with rabbits. I'll tell you if you want. But
let's stay on the cow track and maybe we'll
it
come
did
back to
have
the
a name.
rabbits.
It did have a name, but I've forgotten what the name was because it was eclipsed by what happened. Spoiler alert: I shoot the cow on TV, and then we butcher it, and we learn at the end of the segment exactly the difference between a sirloin and a T-bone and a rump roast and a top. All of it. It's very instructive. It's very honest, and it's very real. But as I'm standing there, so the family's over here, the kids are there, mom and dad are there. Earl, the butcher, he's over here in his panel van, and the cow's in the stall behind me, and the camera's right here. And I look to the camera and say, "Okay, here we are. The cow is going to be humanely dispatched, and then we're going to walk." And as I'm describing what's going to happen, the cow walks up to me and puts its head on my shoulder and starts to lick my neck.
Son of a What is this, a living creature that loves its young and will actually traverse miles to be reunited with its young, which is the thing that's happened?
I am not sentimental about the ways of the world, and Dirty Jobs certainly wasn't either. But I'll tell you something, man. It was one of the more difficult things, really. And Earl handed me the rifle, and I stepped back, and I shot the cow. And 15 minutes later, every organ, all the fat, all the inedible parts were in a giant barrel, and the remaining quarters were on hooks in the back of the van.
So that part over there is going to end up going to public school lunches.
Maybe.
What is this? Is this grade F? Okay, off to public school lunches you go.
But how are we to think about all this? I mean, my bosses were livid. A lot of viewers were upset.
How many PETA? What
All
was
of
the
them.
PETA situation with that?
That at that point, I was better than halfway through what we called the assault of the AAA, the Army of Angry acronyms. So I had PETA, I had HSUS, I had OSHA, I had the EPA.
Yep.
I even had the FBI. So everybody who works for for an agency with an acronym could find something on dirty jobs on any given day that did not comply or comport with their understanding of how the work should be done or something. So of course PETA was outraged. And and all I could say really was, look, if you watch the footage, there wasn't a ton of joy in it, but there was an awful lot of honesty. And if you actually think it's better for people not to know what go, this family ate for the better part of a year as a result of that cow. And I was going to say they ate what they killed, but they didn't want to kill the animal, but they bore witness to it. Earl, well, I did it, and Earl did what he did. Everybody did their job, in other words, to really bring it back to my earlier example of production. Like everybody, there's hair, there's makeup, there's camera, there's audio. Everybody does their job. And at the end of the day, poof, you get a TV show. Well, it's not so different on the farm. Everybody does their job. And at the end of the day, you eat or you don't. And so that really, look, Dirty Jobs was an entertainment proposition, first and foremost, but under it was always that idea that, you know what, you owe it to the miner and you owe it to the farmer to tell the truth of their industry, but you also owe it to the cow. If you're going to eat it, the least you can do is acknowledge its life and its death and how it works.
It seems like there is a theme throughout all of your work of gratitude, and how do you think about gratitude in being a person, in living in this world we're in? Because I think it might be the virtue that we're in most need of.
Okay,
and
that's often a great question.
And it often can sound a little bit like, how dare you say we should be grateful for the X, Y, and Z? But I mean, how do you think about it?
I think a lot about it, both in the amount of time I spend thinking about it and where I rank it. And I'm suspicious of ranking things, especially virtues and vices. But so I have a foundation. It's called MicroWorks. We award work ethic scholarships. We'll give away $3 million next month to people who have applied over the last few weeks. Everybody who applies has to jump through some hoops because we attempt to reward work ethic. One of the hoops is you have to sign a sweat pledge. A sweat pledge is a thing I wrote after some bourbon years ago. It stands for Skill and Work Ethic Aren't Taboo. Speaking of acronyms, it was part of my it's kind of a hybrid between a 12-step recovery and the Boy Scout law. There's 12 things that I believe personally have allowed me to prosper in my chosen field, and 12 things that I also believe would benefit anyone, frankly. And so I insist you sign this thing. And I can't look into your soul and really know if you subscribe to these 12 tenets, but I'm going to ask you to raise your hand and make a pledge and do it. I'm old school too, in that way, not in production, but in that way. The number one tenet of these virtues reads, I believe I have hit the greatest lottery of all time. I'm alive. I walk the earth. I live in America. Above all things, I'm grateful. That's the number one thing that you must tell me and persuade me that you believe if you want me to help you learn to be a welder or a steam fitter or a pipe fitter or a plumber or whatever. And every year I'll hear sometimes from people who don't want to sign it because they simply disagree, but oftentimes from parents of kids who are playing the scholarship game, and they're applying for all kinds of different scholarships, which is fine. And the parents see this, and they see other things on this sweat pledge that are problematic. And they don't understand why.
Problematic.
Why should my child have to sign a thing that says, above all things, he's grateful? Just explain to me why that's okay.
We just worked so carefully to construct a narrative of victimhood that could get them into Harvard and Columbia, Mike.
Well, what I say is hey, look, man, I don't want to make any trouble. And your boy doesn't have to sign it. Your girl doesn't have to sign it. It's okay. We can still be friends. It's just that if you don't, this particular pile of free money may not be for you. And their heads explode.
How dare you?
But I don't mind, because this is my foundation. It's not a company. It's not. I'm told legally. I think I'm still in the right here. But I can insist that I can't make sure they tell the truth, but I can insist that they read it and sign it. And if for no other reason, to have a conversation like the one we're having right now, where people with vast audiences will say, talk to me about the importance of gratitude. And I get a chance to mouth off, because it's all adjacent. If you don't feel grateful to that cow or Earl the butcher, if you don't feel, then I don't know how to talk to you. It's like the tariff argument. If you can't see the country as anything other than a machine that generates money at any given time, if you can't look past your own 401k for a couple of months, if you can't look past the cost of a thing, I get it. It sounds glib. People are on a budget. I get it. But if you can't look past that, then to me, you're not much different than the person who says, I just want to eat the frickin' hamburger. Would you stop making me feel bad about it? I'm like, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, and I'm not trying to make you feel guilty. I'm just trying to make sure you know, because if you don't know, you can never be grateful. And by the way, if you're fundamentally grateful, then I don't know how you can ever feel sorry for yourself. I just don't know how it's possible.
It's, and this is something I got from John Mackey in our organization. You've seen we got all these people. So every so often we'll do a staff meeting, and we open them with gratitudes, usually try to aim at a specific person, sometimes your team, but often it is, it's touching on something in what we are as a human being that's really powerful. It is transformative to simply say the words that you are grateful for someone else. You're grateful for the thing they did for you. Why do you think that is? Because in a way, if you are, and I'm a person of faith, so I don't think we can explain the whole world on simple material terms. But if you wanted to believe that that is the case, the benefits to yourself of being grateful don't make a whole lot of sense. Oh, mirror neurons and social groupish evolution and ev-psych hand waving. Yeah, okay, fine. Except that, you know what? Genghis Khan did pretty well for himself. So there's other ways that you could have the selfish gene be expressed that don't involve a lot of gratitude. Why do you think gratitude works?
Well, I think it works because, paradoxically, it is selfish. And I don't, like I said earlier, I'm not interested in apologizing or feeling guilty for abundance, but I am interested in being grateful for it. And it's not because it checks a box, and it's not because the other person is due gratitude. That's a happy symptom. Being grateful is good for you, first and foremost. Being grateful is following the advice of the pilot, right? When the masks drop and you've lost altitude, let's say you're a selfless person and you care deeply about the people around you. Maybe you're related to them, or maybe you're just a great Samaritan and you're called to help others first and foremost. Well, you're no use to anybody at all, because unless you get your mask on first, you can't do anything because you've passed out. You're out of the game. You're out of the sketch, right? So, it's not selfish to get yourself in a place where you can be of use to others. And it's not selfish to articulate a gratitude in a meeting you've described. The fact that it makes the object of your gratitude feel good for receiving it, that's a happy bonus. But what it does for you, you tell me, how does it How do you feel when you thank someone sincerely for doing a thing that made your life better? Never mind them. How does it make you feel to thank them?
I mean, aside from the simple, like, it feels good. And I'm a heady guy, so I can intellectualize shit with ease. I think that
You're a weirdo, dude. You know that, man? You're really not. You're not like a lot of other people.
I take that as a compliment.
I meant it as one.
It's an interesting question to actually like think about for real. Why? I don't know the answer, to be perfectly honest. My son read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is, I mean, in a lot of ways,
The comedy?
Yeah, yes. You know, there's the comedy part in
My
in
God.
Auschwitz, and then there's the serious part. No, but that book at its heart has has several core messages, but one of them really sticks out to me, and that is that he calls it the last human freedom, and I think he's even quoting another thinker, that the last human freedom is the freedom to decide how you respond to your circumstances. And he's writing it in the context of having survived going through literally all of the worst concentration camps and seeing his family die.
That's right.
The worst stuff in the world.
That's right.
Looking at the face of Satan, living in hell, and coming out and being like, the people who survived, they chose how they were going to respond, how they were going to ultimately feel. And that is a freedom that no one can take from you. And I think, I bring that up because when I think about what gratitude does, you get to choose to dispense with your ego, which I think for a lot of us, maybe all of us, is our greatest enemy.
That's an excellent answer. And it's very adjacent to the one I would give too, which is you can't be grateful without being humble. And interestingly, you can't be curious without being humble. Because to be genuinely curious is to admit in a prima facie way that you don't know the answer to the thing. Otherwise, there would be no need for your curiosity, right? And there would be no happy symptom of this thing we call wonder, right? So you can't be curious unless you're humble, and you can't be grateful unless you're humble. Now, for me, since this is all about me, really, when I think about what happened all those years ago in the sewers on dirty jobs, it was a kind of transformation when I realized I'd been impersonating a host for 15 years. And suddenly, what if I think of myself as a guest instead of a host? What happens, right, when you fundamentally assume a different identity? Well, for me, it allowed me to be way more curious about everything. Because as a host, you're not allowed to be curious. As a host, you have all the answers and you look into the camera.
You're guiding the
That's
process.
It. I will tell you, I have some information and I'm guessing you're keen to have it. So let me dispense with my knowledge, shall I? That's a host, right? And I'm okay at that. Facile, really. But so much more interesting to be honestly ignorant and genuinely curious. And when you are, and when some other guide brings you into something like enlightenment or understanding, then it's very easy to feel grateful right on camera, in real life, in real time.
Yeah.
That was the promise of reality TV. And this whole rumination on why we do good things, man. Is this normally the kind of stuff you talk about on this thing?
This is the whole deal. This is the deal.
All right, because I'm artfully and cleverly going to pivot this into some shameless pluggery for my new show, People You Should Know, on my YouTube channel right now. But before I do that, I want to tell you about an essay I read years ago. I think it was by Thomas Wolfe, and he was talking about why people do good things, why good people are decent. And he said, today, if a decent dad takes his young kid into a store and the boy steals a candy bar, shoplifts it, and the dad sees that he did that. What does he do? Today, or so he argued in the essay, the decent dad says, son, that's wrong. And I'm going to need you to go and apologize to the shop owner. But I also need you to understand, if everybody shoplifted, can you imagine where we would be? That man worked hard to build this store, and the people who made that candy bar employ other people, and blah, blah, blah. And so you would lecture the kid, and you would inform the kid, right? You would enlighten the kid, and then you would humble him by having him apologize. And then we had a teachable moment, and you could all reflect over dinner about what a great dad you are and what an enlightened boy you're raising, and so forth and so on. 100 years ago, same dad, same kid, same scenario. And dad, it's like, you go in and apologize right now, you selfish little snot, slap his wrists and say, you know why you shouldn't do that? Let me make it simple, because you're going to hell. You're going to hell.
Right.
Thou shalt not steal. It's probably the greatest commandment, because all of the others are ruminations on theft. So when you steal that candy bar, you selfish little prick, you're going to hell. And if you remember Maslow, who was not yet born, what motivates him? The desire for more pleasure, more candy bars, getting away with it, or the consequence? Like, wouldn't you rather avoid the pain? Now, no value judgment from me. But earlier on, you said, are we accentuating the negative, and what's going on in these times where we live? And I think part of the answer isn't the San Andreas divide between left and right, or blue collar and white collar, or right and wrong and good or bad. It's the divide between why good people do good things. What is that? Now, there's plenty that Ayn Rand said that I don't subscribe to, but there's a lot that she said that I do.
Yeah, I'm broadly a fan, save for the kill God part. That's not my favorite.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln,
how
did you enjoy the show?
The rest, I tend to tell my Randian friends, like, don't start there. Don't. That's not the best place to start. But anyway, keep
Probably
going.
not. But it's the idea that it's her suspicion of altruism.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
I like that. I like the idea. Like when I examine my own, faults, predilections. It's like it makes sense to me. You can motivate me to do a good thing if I understand the self-interest in me. So yes, you want me to say thank you. When I'm grateful, you want me to apologize when I'm wrong. I'm down with doing those things because I think they're both good for me, not because I owe it to anybody in some sort of inherent way. I think it's good for me to do that as a member of the species. And so this comes up all the time on People You Should Know on Mike Rowe's YouTube channel, airing right now.
yes.
I always argue with my friend Sarah, who is sort of co-hosting and producing this with me. Now, Sarah is a true bloody do-gooder. Sarah looks at the world and she sees problems and she wants to fix them. And she's a social anthropologist who just genuinely loves the world. I'm older and more bitter and broken than I've ever been.
Yeah.
I still love the species. I still got my foundation, but I'm the kind of guy who'll shoot a cow on camera. Right? I'm the kind.
Sure.
I'm that guy. So she and I always have this conversation about why are we doing this show, and I'm doing it because I'm so grateful to be sitting here with you, and I'm so grateful to have got the cards I got, and I feel so fortunate to have played them the way I've played them, and so I have a chance now to do really any kind of show that I want for whatever reason pleases me, and it pleases me to say, hey, America, get a load of him, get a load of her. Right now, in this current episode, there's a guy named Danny Combs who runs an organization called TACT, teaching the autism community trades.
Yeah.
His kid's autistic. He's opened up this foundation. He's changing the world, man. I mean, I've seen it firsthand. I've seen kids who seem unemployable get hired because a trade made so much sense to their brain. So, Sarah, and I don't want to speak for her, but a lot of people would say, look, we want to elevate this because he's doing good work. And I feel the same way. But I also do it because I like the way it makes me feel, if I'm being honest, a lot. I like it a lot. Now I'm still bitter and broken, so I still need that behind the scenes camera to take the piss out of it, right? It still has to be warts and all. But I just dig it.
The show is great. The show works because you work, for sure. You bring that to it. It's not earnest. Even though I'm like a mushy Italian, so like bringing me to tears is not as hard as it should be. But it's a great show, and we'll definitely put links to it. There's two other things I want to ask you about because I feel like they circle your orbit, and one of them is, and I think you're learning about this every day. We all are. What do you think it means to be an adult? So I have a hobby horse, and that is that I think that we've actually, and you kind of touched on this with hey, it used to be like, oh, I'm going to talk to you like you're a little adult and explain the way the world works versus you're just going to hell. Stop being an asshole.
Yeah.
Don't be an asshole. You're going to go to hell.
Because I said so.
But I do think there is something that has happened. It's partly wealth and abundance and laziness and softness and soy or something. I don't know. But it's, we have lost a shared understanding of what it means to be an adult. And the echo of it is we do know when people act like spoiled brats and children. So you can usually say like, oh, you're acting like a baby. If you flip that, that's at least heading towards a definition of adult behavior. But how do you think about what it means to be an adult and what's happened to that idea in our culture?
Asked and answered. It's Frankel, not writ as large, right? I mean, he took it to being an adult in a very general way means genuinely smiling, or call it a kind of bemusement in the face of genuine adversity and discomfort. Travis McGee is my favorite fictitious character, dreamed up by the brilliant John D. MacDonald, who made him famous in 22 excellent books, great pulp fiction written in the 60s and 70s and 80s. He lived on a houseboat, this guy, solved crimes, basically. And he says at some point in one of his many ruminations, the only sensible way to go through life is with the indefatigable attitude of a vaudeville clown who knows he's going to be chased around and beaten with bladders and ultimately take the pie in the face and accept it with a smile and show up for work the next day. And at a glance, that sounds awfully futile, but it's actually not. Being an adult means being in on the joke, being aware that you've got a shot at something miraculous, having gratitude and humor in equal parts, I think, as a default position, being genuinely curious and being humble enough to scratch that itch whenever you feel like doing it. I think. Now, look, you're asking a giant child.
Well, I think adulthood can and maybe relies on preserving a certain amount of that child in us all, right? I mean, maybe. I don't know, like our stoic dads of the older generation kept that hidden.
They were only stoic to us.
That's true.
They weren't our friends. They were our guides. They were, look, I mean, what's that line in that great Frost poem where love and need are one and work is play for mortal stakes. I mean, fatherhood is not friendship. Can be later, obviously, but I think with respect to, you asked me what it's like to be an adult. Being a parent might be different. Are all parents adults?
Clearly not.
Not all adults are parents.
I mean, the the mechanism to becoming a parent doesn't necessarily bring with it any levels of maturity required other than biological. So there's
Yeah, man.
that's the struggle we all have, right?
It's a really good and fair question, and it's obviously subjective. So I wouldn't. I remember I had a scoutmaster once, who was a retired lieutenant colonel, and he ran the troop, like a platoon
Yeah.
with squads, and the whole sweat pledge came. That was the first time anybody asked me to raise my hand and make a promise, and I remember doing that and feeling transformed by it. Why? Why? It's the same. Well, like, why do you feel better when you express your gratitude? Why do you feel better when you apologize when you know an apology is warranted? Why do you feel elevated when you make a promise that you keep, when you take a pledge? I don't know. But I know that when I was 12, 13 years old, I guess, when I did that, I mean, I was in a church basement, and the candles were lit, and all these other guys who were older than me were standing at attention. And this retired lieutenant colonel is looking me in the face and saying, say the words, and make me believe you, It's a heck of a thing,
Well, and there's something about the fact of that. Like, what is that ritual? What is the ritual of marriage in front of the community? It is, in a very real sense, I think, at least in part, to impose a cost. To say, it's one thing to just docu-sign your contract in email. It's another thing to stand before people who can call you out when you fail to live up to the thing and say, I pledge. Or that you have bought into a different kind of cost benefit situation to you have to, even if you don't really believe it, you are now saying, like, everybody here around me can call me out when I turn out to have been full of shit.
Whenever two or more of you are gathered in his name, right? Yes, but I would say this too. That's always been the way it is, but things do change. Back to the earlier part of our conversation, and what else has changed in very, very modern times? I would say our relationship with shame has changed.
Oh, yes.
I would say that I forget who wrote about the death of shame.
I did a video over the summer about this, that I don't actually believe you can maintain anything like a free civilized society without shame. I think you either have totalitarian compulsion or you have private moral codes, which necessarily need to be adjudicated in part by feeling ashamed of yourself when you do something stupid or wrong.
Maslow, your desire to avoid shame is by design rooted in your DNA, and it's supposed to be incredibly powerful. But if society has gone out of its way to say, no, there's no, don't scold me, don't shame me, don't fat shame me, don't, right? It's like, so, okay, well, all of that through the lens of bullying, right? And we're not saying this is not a defense of bullying, but if you
a little bit of bullying can sometimes be okay.
Well, look,
or at least a little bit of teasing, let's say, a little bit of hazing. Hazing actually has, well, I'm sure you must have encountered this a lot with the show.
Oh my God.
The hazing in dirty and dangerous jobs.
I'm the FNG every day. Every day. Okay. I mean, it was my first day on the job for, 12 years. And so, yes. And everybody remembers those days. Everybody knows what it feels like to be weighed and measured and found wanting, But if you're going to talk about, back to humility and curiosity, right? That's just the consequence of being uninformed and ignorant and inexperienced, and at the beginning of your journey, where you're dumber than you don't know your ass from a hot rock, and it's okay. You don't have to be ashamed for not knowing, but there are some other things you ought to be ashamed for. So, yeah, with respect to breaking a pledge, whether it's a marriage vow or a scout pledge or my little sweat pledge or whatever it is, if you just shrug and go, whatever, and the other words you use, it's a great four-letter word that matters, and it's what those Travis McGee books were all about. Travis had a code. He had a code that he lived by. Part of being an adult is having a code and knowing what the code is. I would not presume to say that it's got to be this code or that code, but you better have something. You better be able to point to some sort of North Star. You're a man of faith, terrific. But the idea that there's something outside of yourself, I think is interesting and important.
The Scouts is a great place to come from for the other thing I wanted to talk to you about before we start to wrap up, and that is masculinity. So the Scouts were the Boy Scouts. Now it's not the Boy Scouts. And in fact, when you go to the website, most of the faces are girls. And I say that with incredulity because it sucks. Because the Boy Scouts played this role that you're describing that was potent and essential and like really mattered. And boys, we have a boy crisis. Warren Farrell's been on the show. We talk about it a lot. It's Dad Saves America, but dad to me is one of the things we can do as men that is masculine and is healthy and good. I happen to be the father of a son, and so I think about this stuff a lot. He just turned 20. So he's like not even a teenager anymore, which is completely insane. But our boys are in an environment where the definition of what it means to be a man in general, never mind the definitional questions that I'll leave off for now. But what it means to be a man properly, to be a good man, to have a masculinity that is healthy, necessary, enriching. It has its boundaries, but those boundaries include stuff that makes some people uncomfortable, like the way we treat each other physically as men that is often looks ridiculous, beating the hell out of each other for fun and sport. How do you think about that? What is masculinity to you?
Man. Well, I mean, the thing about the Boy Scouts, and I've already made the point, but just to belabor it a little, it was not a safe space. It didn't feel safe when I was 12, and it didn't feel safe when I was 17. And I got my eagle, and I went on and I lived my life. Dirty jobs blew up, and I wrote 50,000 letters to Eagle Scouts in the country before I stopped. I couldn't do it anymore, but I literally sent out 50,000 letters.
Wow, that's awesome.
Because it did matter to me. We had a boxing ring in the troop room where young boys could settle their differences with, of course, an adjudicated ref. Right? I learned to shoot in the Boy Scouts, bows, arrows, and guns. Whitewater Rapids. Camping for a week at a time with hunting, like all that stuff. I don't know what's happening in the movement today, but I do believe the country still needs the Boy Scouts. We need Future Farmers of America. We need Skills USA. We need the 4-H. And later in life, we need the Rotarians and the JCs and the Kiwanis and the Lions Club and all that. That's the grout that holds polite society together. So I worry that all of that is is going the way of shame. Right? It's all been.
The only thing you can be ashamed of is being a man.
Seems like it.
You can be if you're a man, if you're like masculine. And I'm not even like the most masculine guy. I'm like a creative. I get blubbery watching micro videos on the internet.
No, I know. Look, it's really hard to. I gave a eulogy 3 weeks ago in the National Cathedral for a 92-year-old guy named Clint Hill. Ring any bells?
It does sound vaguely familiar.
Clint was the guy who dove on the back of the Kennedy limousine moments after the president was killed. He was
Right.
he was assigned to that detail, and he guarded Jackie for years. Before that, he guarded Eisenhower. After that, he guarded Johnson, and then Nixon, and then Ford. Five presidents. Five presidents this guy guarded. I met him 7 years ago in a bar. He's just an older man trying to order a drink, and the bartender had never heard of the drink, and the guy pulled a business card out of his jacket pocket, and on the card was a picture of a cocktail with the instructions on how to make it. And on the top of the card, it said, "The Clint." So I'm in. Like, if you're me,
Yeah.
you can't walk through this life and not. So I have questions, right? And
Here's a story. There's a story right here.
my God, dude, he was the most interesting man in the world for real. So an hour later, we're sitting down, and now I'm up to speed. By the way, this is the night before President's Day, 2019, 18 maybe, and he tells me the stories of what he had done and his life in the service and what he had sacrificed and the PTSD that he had wrestled with, and we talked about dirty jobs, and we talked about shooting cows and castrating lambs, and he was from North Dakota, and he grew up on a farm, and
Yeah.
you know, and he was from another generation, truly the greatest generation, and we became friends that night. And I went home, and I wrote back to the mudroom and Facebook. I said, President's Day is tomorrow, and as we think about the men who have led this country, maybe we also think about the men and women who pledged their lives to protect them. And I posted a picture of his business card along with a picture of his book, Five Presidents. And I kind of recommended the book. Anyway, the next morning, my publisher called me. Happened to be the same publisher. I didn't know it. 20,000 people had bought the book. 8 million people had read the story of Clint Hill. And so we became friends, and I became friends with his wife, who was also my neighbor. Long story short, she asked me to speak at the National Cathedral, along with the head of the Secret Service and herself. And I've given a lot of speeches, and I've been in front of a lot of crowds and a lot of people. But standing there, talking about this man who I met in a bar, just a couple of dudes talking about work and sacrifice and risk, and then getting to know him through the books that he and his wife had written. And then seeing him interact with my mom, who came to visit me, and the way he walked her to the car in the driving rain, and held the umbrella over her, this old man, and walked through the puddles, guiding her around, and the way he stood whenever a woman came into the room, and the way that inspired me to start doing the same thing, right? And here I am. I'm a grown-up. I'm an adult, but I'm learning things from this man who had this front row seat to our shared history, right? And I'm learning about him in real time as I'm drinking the Clint, which is an acquired taste, by the way, Campari and vodka and some other nonsense. I don't know. I gave him a lot of crap about it. It's like a pinkish drink. He's like, it's not pink, it's red. Okay. And so
It's light red. It's light red.
he was a consequential man. And I hope this is a good answer to your question, but as he got to trust me, he came on my podcast about 2 years ago. And I asked him to talk about something that I knew he didn't talk publicly about. And it was a couple years after the assassination, and he had hit rock bottom. And he just the guilt. He felt like he let the country down. And one night he walked out of a bar, fully clothed, straight into the Atlantic Ocean with no intention of coming out. The cop went in after him, saved his life. And so on the podcast, cameras and everything, I'm like, so what about that? Where do you put that? And how does that inform your life today? And he was generous with his answer, and humble in his answer. And on the one hand, it made for a lovely exchange on the podcast. But then in the week that followed, I got maybe 100 emails from listeners who said that story completely turned me around. I've been wrestling with this, I've been wrestling with that. And several said, that story saved my life. If Clint Hill, a Superman,
Right.
if there ever was one, a man who could pull the faults back together, if that guy, walked out in rain and back in rain, as Robert Frost said, acquainted with the night, that's the poem I recited at his funeral. But what he did in a quiet conversation on a podcast saved lives. And the fact that he was willing to talk to me about the darkest moment in his life that he had locked up all those years ago. Man, that's what being an adult is.
You embedded in there about as good a definition of how I think about what it means to be a man as I can imagine, which is hard work, risk, and sacrifice. And below the surface of those is courage, because you got to have that to do those things. And it is not to say that there aren't women that have those traits, but we are called as men in particular, I think, to do that, to work, to sacrifice, to take risks. We are the one that lets our kid climb too high in the tree. And we're there. I mean, I have pictures of my son, because he loves to climb, climbing to levels where I'm like, oh, shit, he could break his fucking neck if he falls out of this tree, but not losing my mind. And it's clear that we're built for that. We're built. Warren Farrell says that we're expendable in a certain sense because of this. It's like we are the ones that get sent out to the front lines to be mowed down in war, which it'd be lovely if we could dispense with war, but there's no sign of that as far as all of human history. But we're the ones that do that, by and large. Keeping that at the foreground and finding a way to be grateful for it seems like it's a pretty important part of maybe keeping this society going forward. What do you think?
I think it's a neat trick. Look, it's only the hardest thing in the world to do. And I don't know really. I mean, I really do wrestle with this. Just like your example just now, two things can be true at the same time. I completely agree that giving your boy the latitude to climb too high is something we're called upon to do. I also know that the odds of somebody in the audience dealing with the fact that their kid fell and now can't walk are possible. Is that person listening? What can I say to that person that resonates in the same way? Does my audience, who the hell is out there really? This is what keeps me up at night, because this is my chosen field and I must be this tall to get on the ride, and I am, so boohoo, Mike, deal with it. But when I think about Clint Hill, and I think about everybody, every man that I know who at some point in his life had to take a bite of the crap sandwich and walk something back and right, do a thing that they said they weren't gonna do. I just find it poignant and endlessly poetic, and I'm afraid that if we had a really good answer to your question, like playbook, like oh, so that's it. Good work. My work is done. I gotta go. It's like I think we would lose the poetry. And back to Frankl, the search for meaning. I don't know that we're meant, and I know this sounds a bit glib and like a dodge, but I don't know that we're meant to answer your questions. I don't know that they're answerable, and I don't know that all the books that have been written in service of those queries really do the job.
There's a scene in The Matrix where Morpheus is tied sweating and bloody, and Agent Smith is describing how in an early version of the Matrix we made a perfect utopia and your minds rejected it.
Yeah.
And so we brought you to this. This is the peak of your civilization. I'm sort of bastardizing
Not
it.
bad, but yeah, I get it.
I think that there's like that a lot in that movie distilled a lot of philosophical work, and so it's actually pretty profound. There's a lot of profound moments.
Profundity abounds.
Profundity. That in particular, I find striking, and it touches on so much we've talked about. What kind of creature are we? Because we're not a creature built for comfort, really. Comfort is weird. We're built to survive in a really harsh environment. We are the ones that survived all of the things that should have killed us and killed everyone else but us. Right?
We're built to carry heavy weight for long distances. We're the only creature alive who can do that. We're not the strongest. We're certainly not the fastest. But nothing on Earth can carry weight for distance. Tigers, it's just their jaws, no opposable thumbs. They don't do it. But we're made to go out into the world, to kill the thing, to butcher it, to put it on our backs, and to walk for days back to the family and prepare it. That is our single physical advantage over any, aside from our giant brains. But that's the thing we're built to do. And if you think about it, it checks every box you just mentioned: risk and discomfort, to be uncomfortable, to carry the weight. Tim O'Brien, great book, the things we carried. Right? It was about the Vietnam War, and the metaphor, of course, was all the stuff in their backpack. But obviously, they're carrying they're carrying Clint Hill weight. They're carrying the weight of the world. And yeah, we are called to do that. There's another scene with Morpheus, and it's a passing moment in the Matrix, but it stuck with me. And he's describing to Neo the feeling, the knowledge that he has that something's not quite right, right? Somebody moved the cheese. And he says, blah, 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 but it's there. It's always there, like a splinter in your mind.
Yeah.
Like a splinter in your mind. I don't know if you give these episodes titles, but if you do, that's a good one, because that's what all these frickin' questions are, man. They're like splinters in my mind. I think I have answers, but I really don't. I have portions of answers, and I have the best answer I can give Chuck Todd 9 years ago is different now than the answer I would give you, or even him if he's still got a job. I don't think he does, actually.
Yeah.
But
there's all kinds of zombies walking in our media landscape. Maybe he's not one of them anymore. I'm not sure. No offense to poor berated Chuck Todd in this episode of Dad Saves America.
Poor Chuck is dead. Poor Chuck Todd.
We your first episode, by when this will air next Thursday, so tomorrow, if you're watching on the first day of this episode going live, will be the third episode of your show. But in the first one, you're in a car with a woman who says, kind of almost off the cuff, that she was a meth head for 10 years.
Again, this is go ahead.
And she's someone that's part of this care portal, giving back, helping others, helping families, in this case, a grandmother who needs beds for the kids that she's raising, because there's this broken generational tragedy in which we have a lot of grandparents caring for kids.
So many
in this country.
So many.
There is a breakdown that happened, and there is a generation lost.
Yeah.
And there's this older generation dying, having to do the thing of being the adult. And so here is this woman who says, I was a meth head for 10 years, and and you do you. But you say, she starts to, you say, what describe what happens, because it's really poignant, and it's a moment much like that Clint conversation for the viewer.
Yeah.
and I think cuts to the heart of the work you're doing to bear witness for people, for viewers, for people in pain, for people struggling to find the light in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, wow. All right. Well, so your viewer understands the underlying organization that caught my eye is called Care Portal. It's a virtual entryway into uh, philanthropy and decency. Anybody can go on the Care Portal and see at a glance if there's somebody in the zip code right now who's struggling in a specific way. What do they need? Could be a bed, could be any number of things.
Kind of like a help barter marketplace.
Very much, right? And it's rooted in a lot of practical goods. But the reason the Care Portal evolved was to keep families together, because the foster care system, I mean, it's necessary, but
Deeply troubled.
nothing good really happens on the other end of that, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is, if we can keep the kids, if they got to go with grandma for a while, okay, how can we support grandma to keep the kids? How can we keep them together, right?
Which also partly means keeping like child protective services at bay.
Many times, right? So okay, it's a fraught topic, and it's a macro topic, right? It's big, and so my challenge is micro, is how to keep it small and relatable, and so Lindsay Phillips is a person who works for Care Portal, but she's also a person who nearly lost her kids 10 years earlier and is kind of paying it forward in her own life. So we're driving down the road, and I'm trying to get her story, and we got the cameras going, and she just casually mentions, that the addiction was bad. And I said, well, what was your choice of, cocktail? And she's like, oh, I had meth head, full on, had me bad. And I said, well, do me a favor, since we're being candid. I mean, talk about what that was, because I guarantee you somebody's watching right now who either loves somebody who's in this spot or is in this spot themselves. And we're on the highway and we're driving.
Yeah.
And she gets pretty emotional. And so this is where the style of shooting that we talked about an hour and a half ago.
Yeah, that's why I bring it up partly.
Okay. Because if a director were to yell, cut, or hold on a second, violence would have unfolded. I mean, an impossibly real moment. So I'm like, do me a favor, pull over on the shoulder here. The cars are flying by. And right there on the side of the road, she basically does, you're right, she did exactly what Clinton Hill did on my podcast. She told me about a dark and ugly time, her rock bottom, and how Care Portal got her through it, and why she's determined to pay that back. Now, she's driving around in an old clunker with no air conditioning. We're in Silmar. It's like 100 degrees. And she doesn't know we're going to do something for her at the end of this segment to change her life. We're going to give her a fairly elaborate gift. I don't want to spoil it for you.
No.
But that's the essence that's the difference between a feel-good show and the making of a feel-good show. A feel-good show, the cameras would have been locked down, and we would have very, very slowly walked her into this emotional place. In real life, it happens when you're driving down the highway. And that's what this show is. It's real moments in real life. And yeah, that's about as real as it gets.
Mike, I ask this of every guest as we wrap up. The show's called Dad Saves America, as I said, because I think that that's a role. I believe it in my bones that we as men get to play. Not all of us have to, but if you do, you'll get to be playing this role that starts with the family, starts with yourself, but moves from the family to the community to the society, and definitionally into the future. How do you think about your role in the American story?
Oh, I mean, it's all players on the stage, right? It's kind of Shakespearean. I mean, we're all bit players. Man, it's a tricky question, because there's so many ways to screw it up. I don't want to all shucks it, and I certainly don't want to overstate it. I honestly don't know what my purpose is, but I know that I have an opportunity, and I look at it like this. I started the foundation MicroWorks on Labor Day in 2008, and I did it honestly because I felt guilty. I was doing really well. Dirty Jobs was like the #1 show on the network, and other shows were spinning out of it, and the country was going into a recession, and people were unemployed, and there was this giant skills gap. And I thought, look, the least I can do is call attention to a few million good jobs that nobody seems to want. I had no intention of going to Congress and testifying about the need for more and better and more persuasive PR around the trades, but I did. I had no intention of building a trade resource center where people could go and get more information on the opportunities in their zip code. And I didn't, but the viewers of the show did, because the mudroom turned out to be a very sticky place, and so did Facebook. And so these people rallied around this cause that I was really kind of like, ambivalent, not ambivalent. It's just the foundation was a distant planet in my little solar system. And that was 16, 17 years ago. I've done 5 shows since then, a podcast, books, recording. I've been busy.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. What happened, I think a couple of years ago, I woke up one morning and the foundation was no longer a distant planet orbiting around Dirty Jobs or whatever was central. It was the sun. The foundation became the sun in my solar system. And I realized, my God, everything else I'm doing is rotating around this thing. And we've helped 2,200 people get a job. And many of them are prospering. And the stories, when I ask people that we gave a welding, $6,000 to get a welding certificate 6, 7 years ago. And when I hear them tell me about the fact that they wound up in the Gulf of Oman underwater welding for $300,000 a year, tax free. Okay. Yeah. And now this 28-year-old kid is home, no debt, bought a house, proposed to his high school sweetheart, right? Hired a couple of buddies, a plumber and electrician, bought a couple vans, now got some HVAC guys. Now he's $3-4 million a year in a mechanical contracting business. Because I used to crawl through sewers for a living, because I shot a cow on the TV, because I gave him $6,000 to learn how to weld. I don't even know how to think about that. Yeah. And what's my role in the American story? What's his role? What is going to happen as a result of that? That's one guy who came through a program that I launched out of some misplaced feelings of guilt and possible gratitude. And then everything just goes where it goes, and way leads on the way, to quote Frost again. And so, yeah, now I'm sitting here with you, and I again, I don't have a great answer to that question, but I'm doing my best stoic version to push the rock up the hill, right? And I think like the real lesson of the Stoics, people think of Sisyphus as doomed and futile. Yeah. But a
purposeless tragedy.
Right. But that's not what Stoicism is. Stoicism, back to my scoutmaster, Glendon Huntington, he was the guy who said, look, you want some advice? I'll give you some advice. You're going to hear that it's going to be very important in your life to get out of your comfort zone. You're going to hear that it's going to be very important for you to do things that scare you and frighten you, in spite of your fear and your uncertainty. And that's true, but that's not the secret. And this guy could tell a story, and I'm 14 years old around a campfire, and I'm like, tell me the secret, Mr. Huntington. Tell me the secret to adulthood. Tell me the secret to all of it. Surely. He gave me the answer. Unlike I'm giving you, but I'm just telling you what he told me. He said, all of that's true, but the secret is you got to go just a little further. And with regard to all that uncertainty and adversity and fear, what you have to do is you have to find a way to love it. not endure it,
Yeah.
not tolerate it, not wander out just to try it on and then come back with some story about how you left the cave and killed the thing and cut it up and humped it back. Not doing it out of need, but out of love. Where love and need are one and work is play for mortal stakes, only then can the deed be done for heaven and for future sakes, right? That's the great trick of it all. Now, the SEALs condense it to a great slogan, right? Embrace the suck. But that's basically what it is, you know? And so I don't know what my role is or how I'll be remembered. I'll tell you this, I think Dirty Jobs will be remembered for a long time. It's been on the air every day for 22 years. Deadliest Catch is in season 21.
Yeah.
Why do those shows endure? I'd go back to what you said before. They capture a combination of sacrifice, risk, humor. They amplify men, by and large, who share some sort of common understanding, who are in on some kind of joke. They get it. They know if they all call in sick for a week, party's over. They're engaged in meaningful work. They're comfortable in their own skin, even if they're uncomfortable in the world from time to time. That's what being an adult is.
Mike Rowe, thanks for being on Dad Saves America.
How could I say no? Thanks for picking me up at the hotel. You're a real gentleman. You're going to take me to the airport, or am I hitching?
I will take you to the airport, sir. And
service.
We didn't talk about things you've talked about in a lot of other places, about the trades, about Skills USA. I will encourage our viewers to check all that out. You are out there in droves. I'm glad we had the conversation we did, though. Thank you so much.
Look, shameless plug. Again, microworks.org. We'll do $3 million this year in these work ethic scholarships. The money's there. I'm raising more and more of it every year, and the stakes are high. And it's a privilege to give it away to people who sign my little sweat pledge. It amuses me.
Off to the airport then.
So be it.